Okay, so everyone, thank you for joining us. Happy Wednesday. This is actually part 3 of a series that we've been doing. We've been lucky enough to have kind of covered the basis of a family member, looking at when is it time to move their loved one to memory care and his journey. And now I'm going to be speaking about when is it time to consider memory care, looking at all the different social aspects of this, and when does caregiving perhaps get too much that it's time to look at options, and what ducks do you need to get in a row in order to perhaps move forward. So my name is Lisa Honka. I have a company called Your Key to Senior Living Options. I actually have been a sales director in Massachusetts and in Florida for 10 years. And 4 years ago, I came down to the villages and looked around and said, this is really complicated. Lots of different licensing of different independent assisted memory care communities. There's a lot of families here who don't have children nearby. They may be in second marriages. They may have never had children. And it's very complicated when you're in a crisis to make smart decisions. And so I looked around and said, what's out there for people as a resource? Because I had been a sales director and I had seen some people trying to do this. And I said, I think I can do it better. If I do it with great integrity, if I'm always honest, if I look at the person from a medical, social, and financial point of view, would the options of all the different communities in the area become narrower, and I could find the best fits for them based on what they've told me. So I started my company thinking, I'll help 5 families, 10 families a month. And 4 years into this, I am literally getting 50 calls a month. On Monday, I got 8 calls from different referral sources. I have about 300 referral sources in the area who know who I am, who hear me speak, who see my presentations, who know what I do, everything from the sheriff's office when they find someone in crisis, to the hospital, to wealth managers, to attorneys, to lawyers, to doctors' offices. So many people hear about what I do. And it seems simple, but it's very complicated because you really have to know what questions to ask, where they are in the process, who the decision makers are, all the different factors that go into making that move. You have to understand what that is, but you also have to know what resources are out there, such as home care or hospice or just therapy in your home. Are we looking at maybe meals being brought in? Are we looking at perhaps short-term day stays? Or are we looking at maybe just getting resources in like the Alzheimer's Family Organization, just to talk about next steps for a loved one? But also TLC, a lot of the people that I work with are overwhelmed. And so TLC has been a great partnership with families on this journey, because women, men, they look at their spouse and say, I'm not sure it's time yet. I need permission. What I'm feeling, is this normal? They're going through a grief process. So I try to be a resource for families, not just for placement into independent assisted memory care communities, but also to find the resources to keep them safe in their home, if that's their journey, if that's what they want to do, but also if they want to make the transition, I'm happy to assist them. My services are completely free. I'm actually paid by the community if someone moves into the community. And I work with about 60 different communities, but I also work with communities across the country. So if someone said, hey, I really want to move back to Maryland because that's where my family is, I'll be happy to help them with that and give them a list of questions to ask as they're making that transition. Or if people have someone out of state and they want to bring them down here. For instance, I have someone today who is actually bringing their loved one down from New York. They were in a rehab and they're coming down today. So what we're going to talk about today is getting your ducks in a row. And this is long before you have to actually make a move to a independent assisted memory care community. This is ducks in a row. I've been newly diagnosed. My loved one's been newly diagnosed. What things do I need to do in order to make sure that I have everything in place in case a disaster happens tomorrow to me, my loved one, what do I need to have in place if my child had to pick up the pieces and know exactly how to navigate? But disasters happen all the time, and we just want to make sure that you know, even today, as a very well person, what you need to also be getting your ducks in a row for perhaps future down the road for your kids. And then we're going to talk a little bit about memory care and when does it make sense for someone to begin to consider a move to a memory care community. So right now we're going to just talk about ducks in a row. Next slide, please. Go ahead, Maureen. So we all know things happen, and the what ifs of life can happen at any time. What if something happens to you or a loved one? I had a gentleman that I was working with up in the historic district, and he said, I have home care in place, everything's great. My wife has dementia, but everything's good. I go out golfing, we have a caregiver, and no worries right now. And I had talked to the daughters and I said, you know, we should probably just begin to explore looking at assisted living communities because mom has dementia, dad had a brain tumor, but he was high functioning enough that he wasn't ready to go yet, but he knew down the road he would. And I got a call about 3 months later from the adult daughter who said, my father was in a terrible car accident. My mother was left home for 3 days and she wandered to the neighbor's house across the street. And they looked on the refrigerator and found my information in Illinois. And we are flying down there. What do we do about mom and dad's on a ventilator in Ocala? So what ifs do happen and emergencies do happen, and we never expected him to get in a car accident, but it was life-changing for that family and it put everybody into turmoil. So the what ifs can happen at any point, and I just tell the story because that was one of those moments where as much as they pushed on dad to have a plan, he was not having it, right? He was absolutely sure that he could take care of his wife at home, only went out for a moment and life changed, and they moved to a assisted living right after the husband was released from the rehab, but the wife went immediately and waited for him to return to her because the children were all out of state. So the next slide, please. So one of the things that we always want to make sure is that our advance directive, healthcare proxy, HIPAA authorization, and do not resuscitate orders are in place if you need that, right? So the do not resuscitate orders are for much later in life if someone is terminal. But advance directives, here in Florida, it's really important that you have your legal papers reviewed, especially if you've come from another state and you had them reviewed. Every 7 years, you need to have them reviewed. So if something happened to you in an emergency and you had to go to the hospital, who can talk to the doctors about your medical conditions? Who can talk to a memory care community about a loved one, right? Who has the power to make decisions, talk to the doctors, and what are your decisions? So this is really important that you have it done in Florida. And if you'd spent out of state, you want to make sure that a Florida attorney does review your legal papers because 7 years ago, the rules changed. And if you did not have that redone, you may end up having your estate go to probate, which means it could take 1.5 years for your heirs to sell your house or liquidate your assets. And the state could take 20% off the top for legal fees. So just make sure that all your legal papers are always up to date and you have all the advanced directive healthcare proxies in place. Go ahead, next slide. Again, you want to have the durable power. If you're having a irrevocable trust because you have a loved one who has cognitive impairment and eventually you may need to go down the Medicaid path, you would probably want to set up a irrevocable trust. Most people have a revocable trust, meaning that their assets are in a trust, but if in fact something happened to you, your heirs have the ability to sell your assets and liquidate your assets and to make sure that your estate is finalized. But some people, again, who have a loved one who has cognitive impairment may create an irrevocable trust in order to destitute that person in case they needed a long-term care facility like a nursing home facility or if they needed Medicaid because they did not have the financial wherewithal to pay for long-term placement or memory care placement at some point. Legal papers, you'd also want to have your living will done and your last will and testament. And if you have no heirs, if you have no one that's ever going to be navigating for you because you didn't have children, you don't have brothers, sisters, you may want to look into a legal guardian. And many people that I work with either were married or never married, and they don't have anyone in this whole wide world to help navigate for them. And I encourage them to have a guardian, even years before they might need someone to help navigate for them. In case they have a medical event, that person can help them with doctor's appointments, help them pay bills, liquidate their assets at the end of life. If they wanted to distribute their assets to charities, you've got this guardian in place who really knows you years before you might really need them on a day-to-day basis. There are legal guardians here in the state of Florida, and I can recommend a few. And I encourage people to interview them, get to know them, because you want to know who this person is and that they're going to be with you for the long term. And they are court appointed. They do have to do paperwork for the courts, and they do have an attorney behind them that helps make sure that you do everything correctly and that your billable hours are correct in the state of Florida's for billing hours. Okay, next slide, please. So financial, when people think about how am I going to pay for perhaps independent living, assisted living, memory care, we look at different assets. So the home is considered your biggest asset. People have savings, they have investments, sometimes people have annuities. Some people are looking at Medicaid down the road if they don't have savings, or perhaps if they have a reverse mortgage. Aid and attendance is a federal pension paid to a veteran of a war or the surviving spouse of a veteran who served during wartime. Long-term care insurance is a policy that you bought probably in your 40s and 50s. You pay for it on a monthly or yearly basis, and that helps to offset the cost of living in a assisted living, a memory care community, a long-term care facility, or even getting in-home care if you need it. So we look at a long-term care policy as an asset, and how does that work into the funds that we would need for perhaps placement into an assisted living or memory care. We also look at Social Security. What is their monthly Social Security amount? Pension. What do they get per month from pension? And perhaps a disability. Excuse me, disability for serving during wartime, or perhaps SSI because they were disabled and not able to ever work. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at where do you make a decision? How do you make a decision? How does this decision come apart? What we look at is where are you going to get support in order to help you through this process. So a lot of families that I work with the Alzheimer's Family Organization in support groups in churches, at different facilities. They also work with counseling through TLC, excuse me, and also church organizations also have or did in the past before the pandemic, support groups for people who are on that journey. They also have day programs such as the My Timers, where people can go for an hour or two that have cognitive impairment and be in a social situation to give the loved one a break from the caregiving. So as we're looking at where you're going to get emotional support, of course, from family, from church, but also from some of these organizations. And they're a good resource for knowing what's out there and to support you in your journey. Next slide, please. So of course we look to family and to friends, support groups, and also clubs. You know, clubs can be a great resource. We have the Parkinson's Club here. We have the Alzheimer's Association Club here. We have the Airheads Club here. We have lots of clubs who get together and support each other on their journey and have guest speakers. And that's a great social situation to find out what resources are out there. Next slide. So when you're planning, it's better to be 5 years too early than 5 minutes too late. So we're going to go on. Next slide, please. So what choices do I have and how do I make them? There's lots of choices here, whether you're doing in-home care, right? So through a third party, you hire someone to come in as a companion for a loved one. Sometimes through the doctor's office, if you've had a rehab stay, you can get a companion to come in for 8 weeks. You can get physical therapy, occupational therapy, memory therapy in your home. Sometimes people are looking at day programs such as Melissa's Place, or some of the assisted livings do have day stays, so you could go for a half a day or whole day. And sometimes people are looking at respite stays in a memory care or assisted living, even for a week or two while the loved one goes on vacation. That way they're safe, secure, they have someone managing their medications, they have meals, they have activities, they have a doctor overseeing them in the community. And then sometimes people transition to making it a permanent placement into either assisted living or memory care community. Now, just because someone has cognitive impairment and they are in the mild or moderate stages doesn't mean that they need memory care. Many people who live in an assisted living do have cognitive impairment due to a stroke, or perhaps just the natural aging process. They're not actually a flight risk or a danger to themselves or they really need a secure and protected environment. Many people who live in an assisted living do have cognitive impairment, and assisted livings do work for some people to live in until they do need a secure and protected environment. So there's lots of options, and again, depending on how far along they are in their journey, will determine which community can manage them, which community they need to be in, whether it be an assisted living or a memory care community, and what their needs are socially, but also medically. And so when I work with families, I try to figure out medically what they need, and do they truly need a memory care community, or can they be managed in the assisted living with cognitive impairment? Some of the communities have a in-between stage between assisted living and memory care, and that allows them to get to activities of daily living in much more queuing, and they're still considered residents of the assisted living, but they don't need the secure and protected environment quite yet. And this allows them more freedom, more flexibility. Especially if a couple is moving into a assisted living together, and one has cognitive impairment, it may be that the couple goes in together and the loved one who has memory loss may end up going for the day or part of a day or part of a week, just down to memory care for programming. I've seen this done in many communities, allowing the loved one who's in assisted living to have a bit of a break, to be able to socialize, but also they remain a couple. They still have the same apartment, but for part of the day, the person who has cognitive impairment can go to memory care and partake in activities there that might be more at their level. So just because someone's diagnosed with cognitive impairment doesn't mean you need to go to memory care. And just because you're a couple doesn't mean you both have to go to assisted living, or that one person has to go to memory care. There's lots of options depending on, again, not one size fits all. What is your journey? And as we heard before, from the story that we had gotten from the doctor, he mentioned that she was on a different journey than he was. And so because his journey was going to be that he stayed home, he was looking for placement for her. Not everyone is on the same journey. Sometimes the medical events are so catastrophic, a massive stroke, and you need memory care, but the other loved one that's at home, the spouse, is high functioning and doesn't plan to move to assisted living or independent living, but they do need full-time care. So everyone's journey is different and every story is different. So it's really important to really think about what they need, but also what you might need in this journey, and make sure that both needs are being met. Next slide, please. So what's available out there? Independent living, just so people know, an independent living has a hotel license. They are not there to provide care. So as we look at Sumter Grand, Elan Buena Vista, Carriage House, Steeplechase, and American House, they are independent livings. They are not there at all to provide any care. Many people that I work with say, oh yeah, I've looked at independent living. I think that's where we should go. My husband has Parkinson's and he has hallucinations. That is not what an independent living is for. They are there to provide meals, housekeeping, and socialization. They are not there to provide any medical oversight, so no medication management, no therapy, no physical therapy, occupational therapy. They have a hotel license and they do not have medical staff on site. A assisted living is a community where the residents are 55 and older. There is medical training for the staff. There is usually a registered nurse or LPN who delivers medications to residents. They have either a standard assisted living license by the state of Florida, a limited nursing services license by the state of Florida, or an extended congregate care license by the state of Florida. Each of those different licenses allows them to do different things. So many people think, oh, I'm just going to move into Buffalo Crossings and it'll be great for my husband who has Parkinson's or Lewy body. Well, Buffalo Crossings, the assisted living, has no memory care. It is a straight assisted living. So you really have to know what the license is of the community and what they can provide. So different licenses, as I mentioned, have the capability of doing different things. They may have a nurse 24 hours a day, or they may have a nurse 8 hours a day. They may have a nurse Monday through Friday, but not on weekends. And they also may not be able to do the care in which you need. For instance, Parkinson's medications, you may know, have to be delivered every 6 hours within a 15-minute window. Not all communities can manage that intense care. Ostomy, colostomies, feeding tubes, compression stocks, brittle diabetics cannot be managed by a standard assisted living license. So it's really important that as you begin to look at what does the assisted living do, what are their capabilities, what are my medical or my loved one's medical needs, does this community match the care that my loved one needs? And the same with memory care. For someone who is moving into memory care and they have a complex medical history, it is important to be looking at a community that has either a limited nursing services license or extended congregate care license. Because at end of life, hospice can get involved and be there in the community to oversee the care of that loved one for up to 2 years, activated on your insurance, your Medicare. But if they are bedbound more than a week or a month, it is beyond what some of the assisted livings can do based on their license. So it's really important that, again, whatever your journey is, you make sure that that community can manage them all the days of their life at different stages of their life. Even if it's end of life, you want to make sure that you know what you're getting into and how they manage that. And when hospice gets involved, what does that look like? I have had people call me and say, I had a gentleman who called me and said, my father was at Sumter Grand. He did great. He was there for 2 years, went to Sumter Place, kind of fell through the cracks there. He wasn't seen as much as he could. My father had a couple strokes. He ended up moving to a rehab. He was there. And I think my father is at end of life and he is beyond what they can manage. He is a 2-person assist, not a 1-person assist, but he's a 2-person assist. He can stand, but he needs 2 people on either side of him, and that is beyond the license of what Sumter Place can do. And I said to him, I think your father needs an evaluation from hospice, because I think we're in the end stages of his life. And he said, absolutely, I agree. I said, I don't think you can manage him at home. He's more bedbound than not. What do you think about looking at a high-leveled memory care because of the strokes that he's had? We ended up moving him to a memory care community, and he was there with loving people around him. The son visited him all the time, and it was exactly what they needed. And I think he lived there for about 4 months, and hospice came in every single day and saw him. The care staff was there every day. He had a very peaceful end of life. Not in a hospital, not in a long-term care setting, but he was there surrounded by his family and a loving staff. And that worked because we got hospice involved, and they were able to oversee his care, even though he was a high-leveled memory care resident at that point. Next slide. So figuring out the pieces is like putting together a puzzle. It's very, very tricky. Even for me, sometimes I have to sit back and say, okay, in my mind, imagine all the communities. Who does the best care? Who has a health and wellness director right now? Who has a great activities director? This is very tricky, and it takes a lot of education to know what is going on at any moment, especially during the pandemic. Things have really changed. Who's willing to accept a new resident? What is their protocol for the new resident moving in? How does family visit? So it's very, very tricky, and I encourage you again to find as many resources as you can and pull it together to make an educated decision when the time comes, because right now it's even more complicated. Next slide. So what's a senior living advisor? So I am a senior living advisor, and I help narrow down the options to the best communities or resources that make sense for that family at that time, including just, again, looking at your long-term care policy and figuring out, can we use that for home care? Should we get an evaluation from hospice and see if we can get in-home services? You've been newly diagnosed with cancer, now what? Do we need to maybe think about resources for your wife because she may get burned out? Do we need to get her involved with TLC because this is a life-changing event? Do the children need some counseling? Do we need to make sure that the house is adapted so that we have any equipment that we might need in the house? So I really act as almost like case management. Where can we pull resources for this family, this moment in time, and make sure along that journey I'm there to help guide them to whatever resources that they can get through, again, even the VA. Can we get perhaps VA benefits for them for in-home services, even companion care or meals? What is it that this family needs this moment in time? Next slide. So there's a lot to think about when people are thinking about where am I. First, I ask people, where do you want to live? Do you want to live? Are you in the villages? Does that matter still? Are you still going to be partaking in the activities? Are we looking outside the villages? Are we going to be looking to be moving closer to adult children? What kind of care needs you have? Remember, I mentioned the different licenses of the community, what resources we need, and how do we keep the family member who's staying home? How do we support them and that person who's either been newly diagnosed or who's just had a medical event? How do we support them? What are the care needs, and where's the desired location, whether it be at home, in a facility, near family? And there's a lot of things that go into this. And remember, when you're thinking about, as Jim did, what makes sense this moment in time, I tell families, think about 6 months at a time. 6 months at a time is a lifetime when you're in the middle of a crisis, when someone's aging. This disaster, this event, this change in condition, this diagnosis, what do you need this moment in time for the next 6 months? And every 6 months, evaluate it. Where have I been? Where are we going? what do I need going forward to keep my loved ones safe? Safety is number one, medically, financially, emotionally, right? So how do I keep that loved one safe, looking back and looking forward? And sometimes when you look back and you say, wow, this whole situation has changed so much in 6 months. I don't even recognize where my mother is. She used to be driving, she was going to clubs, and now she's sitting at home watching television and she's talking gibberish about the people who are living in her attic. Well, there's no attic and there's no people living there, but things can change in a minute. And to look back and say, where have I been and where am I now, helps you get an idea how much things have changed. And same with financially. Some people think, oh, I can't afford perhaps all the in-home care. I started off with 1 day a week of in-home care, and now we're up to 5 days, 7 days of in-home care, my 4-hour minimum. I'm starting to think it may be less expensive if we now move to a assisted living or memory care. Home care, just so you know, is somewhere between $20 and $25 an hour. When you have the 4-hour minimum and you're paying $100 a day, $700 a week, and then you start to say, okay, I'm still managing the house, I'm still buying groceries, I'm still paying the utilities and the Wi-Fi and the amenities for living in the villages, perhaps maybe it's time to make a shift, sell the house, use that asset to pay for round-the-clock care and socialization and activities. So just a thought, again, is to look at the process at 6 months at a time and see what your goals are, what have the goals been in place, and where are we going for the next 6 months, do we imagine? Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so when do people start to consider memory care? So this is a card that Maureen designed, and I think it's brilliant. It really talks about if you are the adult child, if you are the spouse like Jim was, and you're starting to think about, when do I make that decision for memory care for a loved one? We see that most people go through these different steps, and as you start to check off the boxes, it becomes more and more apparent that the round-the-clock, 24-hour, non-stop care in your home might be more than you can manage. So we see that as people have cognitive impairment, they sometimes become more aggressive with something called sundowning. Between the hours of 2 and 5 seem to be this bewitching hour where their behaviors become more aggressive, there's more confusion, they may be exit seeking, they may be looking for their parents, they may be looking to go home, they seem more restless. And so that's a time that, again, a lot of spouses say, this is a really hard time, they become more combative, they're hard to redirect. So aggression during those sundowning times. Caregiving stress, and we'll go through caregiving stress on the next slide, but things to think about. Again, when you're having doctor's appointments and they're saying to you, your blood pressure is rising, you're losing weight, you look a little exhausted, you seem breathless, what's going on at home? Caregiver stress. As we know, 65% of the caregivers go first. So it's really important as a caregiver to be looking at yourself and saying, am I okay? I know I promised to take care of this person for my whole life, but at some point, is this beyond what I can do safely for my own health, sanity, safety, right? So caregiver stress is one of the reasons that people think about memory care. Escalating care needs. So I often ask people, how is your spouse doing with bathing? Is that an issue? And they say, I can't get my husband to take a shower. It's been a month. It's been a week. It's always a fight. I can't do it. I can't get him to brush his teeth. I can't get him to shower. He tells me he just did. And that's a bone of contention between the spouses. And of course you want to pick your battle, right? Bathing doesn't seem that important, but it sure is when you're living with someone on a day-to-day basis, right? And you know, again, it goes back to dignity. You know your husband who always dressed so sharp and who cared about what he looked like and smelled like, and he always was fastidious. And then suddenly he won't take a shower, he won't brush his teeth. It's really hard to see that change in someone, that escalating care need. Home safety too. Again, I have many people who say, I can leave my spouse, he's just fine. I had a woman who told me, I just go in and I take a shower, my husband's fine, he sits on the front porch. Well, one day she came out and her husband wasn't there. He had wandered down 4 houses and was sitting on someone else's couch because he thought that was his house. So never underestimate the day in which your loved one will wander away who has cognitive impairment. I have a son that I'm working with in California who called me on Monday and he said, my father, we took the car keys away, but my mother was reluctant to take the golf cart keys away. So my father drove himself to the police annex and said he wanted to go home to New York. And luckily they were able to figure out who he was and called the wife, and she said, oh, it's okay, you know, it's just this one time it happened, you know. But for that moment, right, that man could have went the wrong way on traffic. He could have gone in front of trucks or cars. People might not have seen him on a bicycle. He was going to New York and he wanted to know how to get to New York, and he ended up at the police annex, right? So again, home safety. We don't want anybody laying under bushes and having a heart attack, which I've had one of my clients do, and I got a call from the sheriff. Or they had 9 dead cats in their home who had died years before. You know, you want to make sure that home safety, don't leave anybody alone that has cognitive impairment. Again, sundowning. So sundowning, as I mentioned, is the confusion, anxiety, aggression, pacing, wandering during that bewitching hour between 2 and 5. Wandering, again, here in the villages, we have something that people can get from the sheriff, and it's a scent kit. So if you have a loved one who has memory loss and you know that they are a risk for perhaps leaving the home, you can go to the sheriff's office and get a scent kit. The scent kit is a little jar, and in that jar is a piece of fabric. And when your loved one comes out of the shower, you rub that scent kit all over the loved one, and you store that piece of fabric inside this vial that's double-sided, and you store that. It's good for up to 5 years. So if the dogs have to come and find your loved one in the bushes or down the street, they use that scent to give to the dogs, and the dogs can trace your loved one's path, and they can find your loved one that much faster. So again, that's a scent kit, and the sheriff's office have those for free. And if anyone needs some, I also have some, and I can give you those scent kits. I have some in my possession. So if anybody needs one, they can email me. Changes in behavior. Sometimes we see people rummaging through the garage, playing in the garage with, you know, all the tools, or perhaps going through all the papers. We see stacks and stacks of paper that keep moving from room to room, or perhaps going through drawers and hiding things inside drawers, and they're sure that the keys are missing, the wallet's missing. So changes in behavior, like rummaging through things and looking, or packing, right? Sometimes we see people who have cognitive impairment packing because they don't recognize the people that they're living with, and they're looking to go home and to find their younger wife or younger husband, because the people that they're with are not their family. They don't recognize them. Confusion, disorientation that impairs their physical health. So again, exit seeking, wandering, not realizing that there's a step. As people's brain atrophies, they do not realize depth perception. And so they often miss a step down at maybe the square or at a doctor's office, or if there's a step coming into the house, they can't navigate that, or they end up falling and bumping their head because they just do not have depth perception. They also, people with cognitive impairment, their brain atrophies and they lose periphery vision. So people do not realize as they're driving, there's someone to the right or to the left of them. They don't realize that there's a bicycle on the right side of them as they're driving. So again, if you know someone who has cognitive impairment, it's important that they do not drive because they do not see everything around them because of the atrophying of the brain. Decline in physical health, such as weight loss, hunch posture, or bruising. We often see this when I ask families, is there unexplained bruising on your loved one? They have falls, but they don't tell you about them. They have cuts that they don't tell you about. They have perhaps wounds on their legs or feet that they don't tell you about. So unexplained bruising or weight loss, because again, as the brain atrophies, people have a hard time staying focused on eating. Similar to when you have cancer, it's very hard to stay focused, to have that appetite. Appetite is one of the things that go with cognitive impairment, and to stay focused on eating a whole meal is really difficult for them. They tend to graze. So you may see a loss of weight with someone who has cognitive impairment, a hunch posture, shuffling of their feet. I often ask, do they use a wheelchair walker or do they shuffle? And they said, yeah, they shuffle. How do you know they shuffle? Because they don't pick up their feet anymore. They shuffle along. Decline in physical health, we mentioned that. And then incontinence. Incontinence is really sometimes the tipping point, right? Because people do not want to clean up after their mother-in-law, their father-in-law. They don't want to bathe their mother. And again, incontinence, when you have a bowel and bladder issues, sometimes I have a woman right now who has lung cancer and bone cancer. Her husband has Parkinson's, and every night he gets up to use the bathroom and his Depends leaks, and she's changing the sheets and changing him and bathing him, and she's in the middle of cancer diagnosis. So sometimes, again, that incontinence is what tips people to start looking at assisted living, but also memory care, because it's just beyond what people can do at home. Social isolation, as I mentioned, a lot of people that I work with don't have family, and they may be down here, and they think it's wonderful, you know, that they're able to live in their own house, but there's nothing going on. When I often ask, well, so what's a great day for your loved one? What do they do all day? Watch TV. Do they go outside? No. Do they play cards? Do they read? Do they watch TV? Do they just watch TV all day? And the answer is yes. And if you think about that, what a quality of life. You know, we don't stick our kids in front of the TV. That's one of the things they say, don't stick your little kids in front of the TV. Well, why is it okay with someone who has cognitive impairment living with their spouse to watch TV all day long? In a memory care community, they're busy with activities. They cook together, they have memory games together, they play cards, they do matching, they do reminiscing, but it's really hard for the caregiver sometimes to be that activities director at home. And we often see that that isolation ages people much faster. Being socially isolated is equivalent to smoking 6 packs of cigarettes a week. So again, it's really important that people, as you know, it's difficult in this pandemic to be social, but especially memory care people need to be oriented to time and place, or they start to get their days and their nights mixed up. The other thing is, when you know in your gut, as Dr. Jim said, I knew in my gut that I couldn't care for her in my home any longer, that's when people typically make that move, or the adult children step in and say, Mom, Dad, you've done an amazing job, but it's time now for us to look for expert help. The next slide, please. So this is when caregiving becomes too difficult. When you notice, again, in your gut, you have less energy, you get sick more frequently, your happiness and your joy elude you, you have trouble relaxing, trouble sleeping, right? You have increased irritability, you snap at all things. I asked this man this week that I met, I think it was on Sunday, I met with him. I said, so tell me, how you doing at home? He said, she's always so loud. My wife is always so loud. And I said, does she yell a lot? And he said, yeah, she yells all the time at me. I hide back here and watch TV. And so I went to the wife and I said, so you asked me to talk to your husband who has cognitive impairment. And I asked him how he's doing. And she said, well, what did he say? I said, he said you talk too loud and you're a little bit maybe stressed. And she said, yeah, I'm always barking at him. And I said, I don't think that's good for you or for him. And she said, I know. And so again, sometimes that irritability, who do we take it out on? The loved one, right? The one who has cognitive impairment. Sometimes, again, you're always saying to them, well, here, eat your dinner, or get dressed, or get in the shower, or why don't you listen to me? Because they can't, right? They can't. They just don't understand anymore. And you're really dealing with somebody who has limited ability to process what you're saying, to follow directions, and to really understand the words. It's almost like they're talking Chinese, right? And you're trying to give them directions and they just don't understand. So again, you're snapping at them, you're irritable, you neglect your own needs, such as going to doctor's appointments, going to the dentist, seeing friends. You feel hopeless and helpless. So those are some of the signs of caregiving burnout. Next slide. So how do we afford a senior living community? Again, if that is your journey, or even in-home care, right? So we look at Social Security, we look at pensions, savings, sale of a house, long-term care insurance, aid and attendance, which can be used for in-home care if you meet the medical and financial criteria. Medicaid, again, for someone. Accelerated death benefit. I've had people turn in a life insurance policy because it was over $100,000, and they said, you know what, we don't really need the money, but I do need it for in-home care, so I don't have to take out my savings, so I'm going to use the accelerated death benefit. I know that my spouse has less than 2 years to live. Life insurance settlements, so again, turning in life insurance policies for cash if you no longer need them. Reverse mortgages, again, some people look to reverse mortgages for the short term in order to pay for perhaps a spouse to live in a memory care community. And home equity loans, again, sometimes it's easier to do that than to dip into your 401k or savings. Some people do that for short term, but you really have to work with a financial advisor on what makes sense for those next steps. Next slide, please. So again, these are the circle of support for people who have been either newly diagnosed or have a loved one who has cognitive impairment. You want to make sure that your legal papers are in order, your financial papers, again, so that you know what your assets are. I had a woman that I'm working with right now whose husband was at Freedom Point, who's now living temporarily at a assisted living memory care. And I said to her, so how much, you have a reverse mortgage, what's your asset? She says, I don't know. I said, well, you need to call up Frost & Frost and we'll talk tomorrow, but I need to know, do you have $20,000 left in the world or $60,000? Because he needs memory care, I believe. He's got wounds on his feet. He's 90 years old. He was a bus driver. I need to figure out what I'm looking for. Are we looking for a Medicaid facility? So it's important that, again, you're looking at your financials. She's staying home, but he needs care. What's your financial situation? Socially, again, making sure that you stay in contact with your friends, your family, you build a support system around you, such as, again, TLC is such a great resource for, again, making sure that you're okay. Pre-planning, again, through your attorney, if you have to do that. Pre-planning with your adult children, you know, what does the future look like? Are they building an in-law apartment for you? Do they want you to eventually come live near them? Are you going to be living here? Do you have long-term care insurance? Working with a senior living advisor. Again, I work with many people who have no children here who say to me, if I go to the hospital, can I call you? And then as my children are racing down from out of state, can you and my children help navigate the next steps for me, whether I'm going home with home care, getting therapy in my house, or if I'm going to have to move to an assisted living because I'm 90. Will you work with my children out of state? Can I have you be introduced to them? I want you to have their number. So if anything happens to me, I want you on my emergency call number so that I can get in touch with you and you can help make sure I have all the resources in my home or for a short-term placement if I need it. Make sure that you have all your medical records together. Make sure you have an updated med list. your prescription drug card, your insurance cards, all in one place. So again, if your adult children had to do emergency placement for a short-term respite for someone, they can just pick up that information and be able to navigate, and everything's in one place, such as your legal documents and your medical documents. And then end of life, have you already prepaid for a burial? Is it going to be at the Bushnell Cemetery because you're a veteran, or is it going to be out of state? And where is that information? Is it all together? And then back to the emotional. Again, TLC has been a great partner, and they are great at supporting people along this journey, because it's sure not easy, and people have a lot of emotions that they need to go through when someone's being diagnosed or they've been diagnosed with something. Caregiver burnout is absolutely one of the hardest things that people go through, and trying to make that decision about next steps for a loved one is very emotionally exhausting. So next step, please, next slide. So again, who's ready to create your circle of support? I hope this was helpful. I hope that you learned something that you didn't know before. I know everybody out there is super smart and super savvy and have learned a lot, but this is just, again, sort of a high-level view of just planning for the future, making sure that you're safe, your loved one's safe. And again, if I can be a resource to anybody, certainly reach out, call me. If there's anything I could do, I certainly want to make sure that everyone stays safe. Any questions? I think we have a couple questions.
Okay, I don't know if we have any questions from our audience. If you have a question, just type it in the chat box over to the right-hand side. But we do have one question that was sent to us. Lisa, people want to know when they should get started.
Yeah, so good question. So even today, years before, right? You're 60, you're 70, you're 80. You need to start planning, again, legally, right? Make sure that all your legal papers are in order. Financially, where's your assets? If you needed care this year, next year, 6 years from now, how do you plan to pay for that? Don't put your head in the sand. Look around. Do you have long-term care insurance? What does that policy cover? Also look around, what is the value of your house? Do you have a reverse mortgage, right? Do you have savings? Do you have a pension? Do you have life insurance policy on your loved one? Where are your assets? We need to be looking at that. This is an amazing place to live in the villages, but a lot of people move here and try to keep up with the neighbors, and they burn through a lot of money. So we want to make sure that, again, you know where your assets are. Medically, you want to make sure that you're keeping up with your doctors, your dentists, you understand what your diagnoses are. Make sure that you keep your family in the loop on what's going on with you. A lot of people of this generation, I find, are very, very private. A lot of people that come from New England are very private. They don't like to share. It's very important. People are not being nosy. They're just trying to see, does mom and dad have this together, or are we going to be surprised, right? And again, when you don't share, sometimes there's reasons you don't share, right? I often find that when my kids don't tell me things, I should be knowing things, right? So again, same with your parents. You want to know how things are going financially, medically, make sure legal papers are up to date, make sure that those people that you want to help navigate for you at some point understand that they're the chosen one. They understand what your wishes would be, so that they don't make decisions that are not yours, right? I had I think I mentioned before, I had a son who came to town, and his dad had picked out a place for his mom with cognitive impairment. When the dad had a heart attack, the son had to pick up and do whatever he thought was appropriate. Well, it was totally not appropriate, and he ended up putting mom in a memory care community in Orlando. which was not the community that the husband had chosen while he was having the heart attack. And she ended up dying. She was in totally the wrong place at the wrong kind of facility, but he had to make a quick decision. And the husband was heartbroken because it was certainly not the community that he had spent time researching and understanding. So you really want to make sure that your family knows what your plans are. So it's never too soon to get a plan.
All right, well, it doesn't look like we have any questions from our audience members, and we kind of need to wrap this up. So, Lisa, I'm going to ask you to let folks know how they can get started, and then we'll have Pat come in and tell us about TLC.
Sure. So again, my name is Lisa Honka, and I'm a senior living advisor. I have a company called Your Key to Senior Living Options. They can get in touch with me either through my website, by calling me, by texting me, or by emailing me. And I meet with people 7 days a week. So if weekdays don't work for you, I can meet with someone on the weekends or evenings. Or again, during this pandemic, we're doing a lot of phone conversations. And then if I do need to meet with people in person, or if I have to look over something, I can meet them at a park. So again, if you have any questions in the future, if you want to meet, if you want to just have a phone conversation, I'm happy to meet with anybody at any time. And that's my contact information. And then Pat, go ahead, tell us a little bit about TLC.
Well, first I want to thank you, Lisa. That was extremely informative, wonderful presentation. Thank you very much for that. TLC Services is for emotional or mental health. If anybody is interested, you can visit our website at tlc-services.org, or you can call me at 352-322-0576. And if you'd like to donate, you can do it on our website also. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Mm-hmm. All right. So thank you again, everybody. I hope this has been helpful. Has it been helpful?
Very much so. Very much. Very much so.
Good. Good. All right. Well, again, I think one of the things I'd like to do in the future is have even a memory care director and executive director maybe tell us a little bit about what goes on in a memory care community. Many people are frightened of it and say, oh, you know, it's better to keep my loved one at home. But I also want you to know what the protocol is during this COVID time. So I'm going to work on getting a memory care executive director to give us an overview of what they do on a day-to-day basis with residents and what makes that different than having someone stay at home. Why is that a positive experience? So I'm going to work on getting that done in the next couple of weeks. But I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I hope this has been helpful. And again, if anybody has any questions in the future, certainly send me an email, a text. I'd be happy to answer any questions at any time. All right, everybody.
Bye-bye,
be
everyone.
well, be safe, stay hydrated, get exercise. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care, everybody.